You know, most parents of little children will tell you that their daughters and sons, they're like sponges. I mean, they soak up all kinds of knowledge very quickly, including the things you don't want them to know. When you tell children to do one thing, though, but then you go and do the opposite, you'll see that they quickly catch up onto that, and they'll understand the phrase, actions speak louder than words. If your children are teenage children, they might ask you, why did you say one thing and do something else? Generally speaking, doing what we teach is far more effective than, say, just telling people what to do with your words. Your actions speak volumes. If you were to ask the average Catholic person in our parish, about church teaching they feel is most important and most authoritative, I think they might think back to the days, maybe depending on when they were born and raised, they might think about the days of when they were taught about catechism, or maybe a little later in life they were taught about faith formation. Whatever it is, they might keep in mind certain things they've heard along the way, whether it was something they read, or maybe something they heard the Pope say, or maybe something they read in the paper about the Pope making an announcement about something. If they hear something that sounded a little different, some people might think there's a difference there. They might think it's a little sketchy. But at the same time, though, doing as we do versus doing what we say matters a lot. I mean, I could think about personal things. How many times have we been disappointed in relationships with people because people we knew and trusted and loved said one thing and did something else? And maybe it hurts too when we think about our experience with the church over the last 20 years. The whole experience of sexual abuse. The church saying some things, the church denying some things, the church brushing stuff under the rug in some cases. Leaders not being straightforward with us. It's one thing to take note when our daughters and sons call us on things, but they're children. We're adults. We'd like people to be very, very straightforward and honest and direct with us. Doing what we say and meaning it means a lot. It talks about truth. It talks about integrity. It talks about the kinds of lives we like to live with one another. And really, if we think about it too, it's the kind of life that Jesus calls us to live. I mean, let's think for a second about what's going on in our gospel. Jesus is teaching, and he teaches like no other teacher in his day. Mark is not the only gospel writer to talk about how Jesus teaches with a new authority, and the people notice that. But it's interesting, in the gospel today, Jesus is he's not citing things from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Scriptures. He's not speaking to teach from the head. Jesus is teaching by his actions. There's a man there stricken with an evil spirit. Jesus makes the spirit come out of him. The scribes, they just taught words. Jesus teaches by actions. That opens their eyes. That draws their hearts to him. They are ready to follow him. It's something very special because we see Jesus teaching in lots of ways. Sure, like elsewhere, let's say elsewhere in Matthew's gospel, they get the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus does kind of sit and teach, but he does so by speaking to the heart. And today in Mark's gospel, Jesus teaches by acting directly and decisively. And the people pick up on that, and they're ready to follow him. They're ready to follow him. Perhaps that's something that's a guide for us some 2,000 years later. The experience of hearing what Jesus is doing, listening to him, and then putting those things into practice. Imagine early on, say in Mark's gospel and in Matthew's gospel, Jesus is having a new encounter with the disciples. The disciples are new to him. How do they learn what Jesus is doing? They sit back and they watch. They're learning how to become disciples by watching what Jesus does and listening to what Jesus says. Can we think about how we share faith with one another by being directly taking Jesus' ways and making them our ways? May we put them into practice and live our lives in fidelity to Jesus, knowing that he was a teacher who spoke with his words and actions. May we learn to do the same thing and be direct and honest and mean what we say with one another and bring Jesus to others in very, very direct and honest and forthright ways.